arrived at the final coaching session with Rabbi David Lapin. In the first installment, we spoke about graduating yeshiva versus leaving yeshiva. We spoke about the world of business as a world of chesed and some other fundamental topics. In the second session, we spoke about midos at home, midos at work, values, mar makomos and chazal for the importance of self-improvement and the tests that HaKadosh Baruch Hu requires us to face in the world of business. And today in our final session, we're going to talk about leadership, two types of leadership, and we're also going to talk about work-life balance and family. So to start with leadership, I guess let's pick up with one thing that we discussed last time, and that is you mentioned this ideal that as I'm able to progress in my career, I will be able to get to a point where there's a team underneath me and I'm free to focus on the more important things and have more flexibility in my time and be able to have that space and leverage. And the question is as follows. There is a trajectory in the corporate world which says that, well, if you do a good job working 8 hours a day, you get to work 10 hours a day. And if you do a good job working 10 hours a day, you get to work 12 hours a day. So that trajectory is certainly one that I hope to not be on, but we've mentioned in the past that is a danger and could come up. So what are the keys to putting myself on a track where as I get better at what I do and more experienced, I'm able to achieve more of what I want to achieve and have more flexibility and independence with my time and not less?
Thanks, Yaakov. And the question is a broad one. The nature of work has been changing for well over a decade. Obviously, it's been changing forever, but at a fast pace, it's been changing for well over a decade. And it radically changed with COVID and then with the unleashing of AI a couple of years ago. And it's important to get our head around what this radical change is. It's important to completely redefine work and the world of work. The idea of hard work is already archaic. The idea of melachton na'aset al yedei acherim, that there's such a concept as your work can be done by others. It's not about how hard you work. It's about how much you accomplish. It's about the value you add to the business you're working for, the value you add to its customers, the value you add to your own customers if you're in your own practice or business. And we need to learn increasingly how to delegate process to technology, because technology does process better than we do. And process is where all the hard work is. Process is where all the time-consuming stuff is. And so much of process, of course, we've seen it as technology has developed even to where it is today. How much of process that humans used to have to do has now been automated. So we need to get better and better at automating process and delegating. But we'll come to delegating in a moment. Let's talk about automating so that we then need to think very carefully and continuously, what can we do that technology cannot do? What is it that I can't delegate to technology? Because that's where I need to be applying my mind. What is the difference that I can make to work? So to understand that work is no longer about input, it's about output. It's no longer about how many hours of labor. So if my employees are working around the world, as mine are actually, I have no way of tracking their time. I'm going to have to trust them in any case. So I've got to readjust to the fact that I don't really care about how long it takes them to do things. What I care about is how much gets done and the quality of what's getting done. So we, as people working in the workforce, also have to start thinking more in terms of how do I make a difference? How do I add value? And how can I get technology to take up a lot of the hard work, a lot of the process? And the deeper you go into understanding your own unique kochos, as you've done, for example, in the work that we've done together on your leadership fingerprint, looking at your kochos, looking at your midos, looking at values, passions, capabilities, the more you bring that to work, the more unique and therefore the more valuable your work is. What is value? Value is to supply something that's rare and that other people need. If I'm using who I am, I'm a rare human being. There's nobody else in the world like me or like you. And there never have been. There are over 7 billion human beings. There's not another one like me. Now, if I just act the same as everybody else acts, then there's nothing rare or unique about what I'm doing. But if I bring my own kochos into my work and I invest that into my work, then there's something very unique about my work, particularly if I'm providing people with what they need. And that's part of understanding my purpose. What have I been put into the world to do? Because my work is one of the instruments of my purpose. It's through my work that I can accomplish things in the world, both in terms of ruchnius and gashmius, physically and spiritually. So understanding the purpose that we're here for, that's where we start experiencing siyata dishmaya, to understand I'm a unique individual. I've been put here for a certain reason. I have certain kochas. Bring those kochas into fulfilling my purpose through my work and other things as well, but partially through my work as well. That's when we encounter siyata dishmaya. And to realize that as much as technology advances, business is still about relationships. It's about people. It's about connections. It's about chesed. It's olam chesed yiboneh, as we spoke in one of the last sessions, that business is at its core. It's chesed. It's providing the needs of other people. And AI doesn't do as well as humans when it comes to relationships and chesed. So provided we remain authentic to who we are and we don't become robotic, then we really have the opportunity to get the hard work done by technology and to add the value that technology can't add. If we're going to be robotic, we need to understand we're competing against the robots, and they're much better than we at being robotic. So it becomes increasingly important for people going into the workforce to develop their humanity, to develop their greatness as human beings, to develop their midus, to develop their character. This now becomes an imperative if they want to really be successful in that world. And then there's innovation, which is also a human faculty, because innovation is also founded on chesed. This was one of the big new ideas that Satya Nadella, he's not a new CEO anymore, he's been there for over 10 years, but the CEO of Microsoft, I don't know if people realize how big a transformation he brought into Microsoft and how quickly he did it. And that foundational to that transformation was getting people to understand that their work is chesed and innovation is chesed. Innovation is, I can solve a problem for you. I can find a way to do something for you that either you cannot do or you cannot do at the cost or the speed that I can do for you. So to be innovative, you need to be unbelievably empathetic. And Satya Nadella talks about how he was taught empathy as a child in India and how useful that has become in his work at Microsoft. So to understand that human connection and relationships on the one hand, and empathy and innovation on the other hand, are the two things that robots can't do at this time anyway, and where our focus needs to be. But we need to be great human beings for that.
You mentioned processes and you mentioned delegation and the importance of bringing your own humanity. So what about when it comes to human delegation, whether it's within an organization or outsourcing tasks? I could see how that could be a very useful skill and tool in freeing up more of my own time for whatever it is I want to be focused on. So, and you also mentioned in our conversation that this is something that you've utilized by always having an assistant to be able to delegate to. So how do we do that in the most effective way?
So really important to focus on the fact that you shouldn't be doing anything that others can do better than you or even as well as you, unless you're doing it for the purpose of learning. You want to learn a new skill. So then obviously you'll be learning in the beginning. You won't be doing it as well. But other than that situation, you should never be doing anything that others can do, which doesn't mean that you sit on the beach. That means that you do things that others cannot do. So just as we talked about technology, being able to employ technology to do as much of the process as possible, anything that you don't have to do physically yourself, so it is with delegating to other people. The old picture of delegating was having a team under you. So you would sit in the corner office and you would have all your workers sitting around you and you would drive them like crazy. It's very different now. People manage their own time. And they might be dispersed in other places, even in other parts of the world. It doesn't matter. They might be outsourced. They might not work for you directly. You might pay them for the work that they do, but not pay them for their. There are many, many different models. But the important thing is to keep on looking at your work and saying, what am I doing at the moment that somebody else could be doing? And to be able to delegate that. And sometimes even if they can't do it as well as you can do it, the fact is it's liberating you to do more valuable things. So it's focusing on the highest value add, that I should be spending my time on the highest value add. On lower levels of value add, I should be hiring people who might be earning less than me, might be less expensive than me, and sometimes not. Sometimes we hire people who earn more than us because they do it better than we could, and it's better for the business that way. So as with technology, very important to push off anything you don't need to be doing, to empower people, to liberate people, to do it their own way. It doesn't have to be done your way, so that you can apply your kochas to things that are more valuable.
Is this true even for me starting off as a junior? That's usually where the everything, flows downhill to the bottom rung. So how does that play a role in my first role when I'm at the bottom of the organizational flowchart?
So you could find quite early on that part of your innovation is to discover this stuff that I'm doing, that there are programs that can do this, technology that can do this. And if I employed the technology to do it, it would cost us X, but that would be free me to do Y, which would be worth 10X. So that's where your creative thinking can be going as you're doing stuff, to start realizing this can be that can be automated. And that's why it's important for everybody to have enough of an understanding of technology, at least to understand what could be automated, and likewise delegated. You might get to a point quite easily where you say, what we need is some specialized help. I need somebody who's better at this than I am, can do it in a fraction of the time that I do it. It will cost us X, and again, will release my time to be able to focus on Y. So as long as you're always looking at ways to add more value, it's not about doing less work. It's about adding more value, and finding through others, whether outsourced or team or technology, a situation of malachtam naset ididei acherim, where others can do your work.
That's cool. One other thing on this topic that we mentioned a little bit, but I want to ask you about, is the fact that, if you tell me, as you go up in the corporate ladder, so I'm going to get paid more, that's great. Nothing wrong with a little extra parnasa. And, you'll be a little more of a status and respected because you're more senior level. That's also great. But if you start telling me that going up that corporate ladder is also going to start meaning the expectation of more work, sometimes, being very busy is a status symbol, and it shows your commitment in certain organizations or certain spaces. So that's something I certainly want to be avoiding. And it's something that I could end up encountering at different points. So is the only advice to stay away from such an organization where you need to prove yourself by working late hours, or is there other ways to navigate that challenge?
So I think one has to be strong in character and discipline, which you are. So that should serve you well, so that even if you are in such an organization, that you don't get wrapped up in that. But there is another piece to that, and that is that a person can outgrow their job. And I don't just mean that they can do it and they're bored by it, but even from a position of status. So status is somewhat important, and I don't mean status in a very superficial level, but for you to appreciate the value of what you're doing, for you to feel you're moving forward. Work takes up a lot of a man's time. Nowadays, women also. And no matter how well you manage your time and your learning and family and everything else, you've got work-life balance, it's still going to take up a lot of your time. And during that time, you want to be growing as well. You don't want to just be doing a job so that you can grow in the other time. You want your work time also to be a source of growth for yourself. And one grows out of it. One gets into a position where it's not challenging enough. I don't feel I'm making enough of a contribution. The way people look at me in society, and again, I'm not talking from a superficial sense, but even just from a sense of self-respect and dignity and some level of COVID, they have a value to people. They inspire us. They help us. It encourages us. So there are times where you do want to move up and you want to take on more responsibility. And taking on more responsibility sometimes does mean harder work or longer hours, and you'll have to make that trade-off at different phases in your life. Your family needs you a little bit less. They're just ways of you earning enough to be able to employ some help at home, and that makes things a little easier. There are ways to trade it off, but I think try and avoid looking at it entirely negatively. If it's just a matter of I need to have face time, I need to show myself to be working like crazy so that I get noticed, that's very toxic. But if it's that it's time for me to take on more responsibility, and that might mean more time or effort or thought, there are times in your life where you'll want to take that on, and it's positive, it's not negative. It's interesting when we talked last time about the importance of not talking about leaving yeshiva, the terrible. But when I shifted my career out of yeshiva and into the business world, I had a very fascinating conversation with Rebbeinu Mishkovsky, my Rosh Yeshiva. I said, I'm concerned. He said, what are you concerned about? I expected him to persuade me to stay. I was really shocked by the conversation. I was preparing for the conversation for weeks. I was nervous, and I expected him to bring as much pressure as he could to get me to stay on. And he said, no, it's the right time. And I said, but what do you mean? He said, what are you so worried about? I said, time. I said, at the moment I'm learning, X number of hours a day. It's going to cut to half if I'm lucky. He said, but you can't imagine how much more chidush will come to you in that half, because you're engaged in the world, because you're experiencing things, you're living, you're alive, you'll be seeing things. Your koach hachidush is supercharged by the fact that you're spending that amount of time in the workplace. It's not the one at the expense of the other. And that changed my whole perspective. And in retrospect, he was 100% right.
Wow. So let's transition a little bit to the other type of leadership. So we discussed that, but till now was the more narrow sense of going up the corporate ladder and being a manager and being an executive, and the trajectory and the path to take in that sense. But as we've discussed, leadership is a lot more than that. It's about inspiring others, influencing others. I guess we could call it, uppercase L leadership. And you did write a book called Lead by Greatness. I referenced it a few times. Great work there. So maybe you could just define leadership in the more fundamental sense and what's important to know about it going forward.
So leadership isn't a position, it isn't a job. It's a dynamic in a given moment. At any given moment, you're either leading or you're being led. Either, as Reb Chaim Lifshitz used to say, you're either a gavra or a hefza. You're either a gavra that is acting on the world, or you're a hefza that is being acted on by the world or by others. In a relationship between a husband and a wife, or between two friends, chavrusas, that dynamic shifts in seconds. You can be leading in 1 second and be following in the next second. So it's a dynamic. And leading and following can happen with inanimate objects as well. There are some people who can lead their cell phones and some people who are led by their cell phones, whether you're teaching or you're parenting. And one needs to be open to following as well, not just to leading. There's sometimes you've got to open your ear and be able to take in, to be mekabel. Being mekabel is following. So we're not meant to be in leadership mode at all times. It is a moving dynamic. But the way I define leadership is whenever you're inspiring another person to think, feel, or act differently, you're leading. Whether you're trying to sell something, or you're teaching, or you're influencing, or you're explaining an idea, whatever it is, if you're trying to inspire another person to think, feel, or act differently, you're leading. And your capacity, your ability to lead is going to affect your level of success.
And I'm assuming that the number one rule of influencing people and changing them is that they don't feel like they're being changed, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think that a great leader, they can feel it, but in a way where it's through teaching and facilitating rather than through imposing and controlling. You want to become somebody that others want to follow. That is the key of leadership, because you can get things done through other people. There are lots of books that define leadership as getting things done through others. But to me, that's management. That's not leadership, because you can get things done through others by forcing them. I'm paying your salary. You do what I say. If you don't do what I say, I'll fire you. That's not leadership. So it's not just getting things done through others. It's being somebody that others want to follow and would follow you even if you didn't have the status. They would follow you even if you weren't their boss or in whatever relationship. And to be somebody that others want to follow, you need an enormous amount of self-mastery. Because the moment you lose it, the moment you lose mastery over yourself, you lose trust, you lose respect, and nobody wants to follow that. So you need self-mastery, you need trust. People need to trust that you have their interests at heart, not your own interests. You need the ability to connect with people deeply. You need the ability to inspire people. And you need wisdom. People want to know that at least in some area you have wisdom that they don't have access to. If those pieces are in place, then one can lead. And you'll notice how all of those are about working on oneself. Those are all Musar things, aren't they? You're talking about you, what kind of person you are. It's not about what do I do to you. It's not about my skills at managing you. It's my skills at managing myself. Because if I can get to that level where I have these elements, people will want to follow. It then becomes about helping those around me to shine. And I can only help them shine if I'm secure. If I feel insecure, I'm going to want to take credit. But if I can do the opposite and let them take credit, that comes from an inner sense of security. And seeing myself as the conductor of the orchestra rather than as all the players. And a conductor understands that the violinist can play a violin better than he can. And the cellist can play the cello better than he can. And the drummer can play the drums better than he can. That's the nature of an orchestra. So a leader understands that the people I'm leading actually can do the work better than I can. They know their work better than I do. What I can do is orchestrate. I can bring it together. I can inspire. I can uplift. I can give direction. And that applies again, whether one is in a one-on-one leadership situation, talking to a friend or a husband or a wife, or whether you're leading a team of people or a large organization.
And is it possible that a person would be truly plugged into their own values and confident and secure in their own sense of self, but lack the charisma or inspirational qualities to actually inspire others?
Yes, that's a great question. And I've done a lot of research asking people to name those who have been most inspirational in their lives. And they've made these lists, and we've got hundreds and hundreds of answers to that question. And we then ask them, how charismatic were these people? And very few of them are charismatic. It's usually a grandparent or a parent or a teacher. It's so interesting. And then you say, but was that person particularly charismatic? They say, no, not at all. So this is a bit of an illusion. It's a bit of a fake idea that you need charisma in order to lead. Charisma is very helpful as a communication tool. Charisma is an unbelievable gift if one has it, but it's not necessary for inspiration. You inspire people with who you are. You inspire people with your own authenticity. Inspiration comes from deep inside. That's why it's inspiration. It comes from inside of you. It's a force of energy that comes from incredibly deeply inside. There's an energy, it just comes, it radiates from deep inside the person and enters the other. It's really dvarim hayotzim min halev nichnasim min halev. It's heart to heart where that inspiration comes. It's not from charisma. I'm sure you have it too. If you think of the people who've inspired you, when I think of the many, many, many hours that I was privileged to spend with Rav Meir Soloveitchik, the Briskerov's son, who passed away a few years ago. And Rav Meir would sometimes sit. We would usually, when we had a session, it would usually be about an hour. And I would say that 70% of that time was silent. I would ask something and he would just sit silently for a long time before he responded. And sometimes then he would ask me something. But in those silent times, there was such inspiration. I came out of those sessions on such a high. He wasn't a charismatic person. He was quiet. He was so sensitive, so deep. He could be funny. He could be a little bit entertaining, but he wasn't charismatic at all. And yet so inspired. So one has to understand the true role of charisma.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about family. Talking about facing my fears. This is certainly one that I've thought about a lot. Being in Kollel is wonderful and provides me a really great opportunity to learn close to my house and to have very flexible scheduling when there needs to be. And obviously going to the workforce is going to affect that at all. So what are the keys to achieving work-life balance? You can tell me if you like that term. Some people do, some people don't, as far as this next stage of my life.
So first, the bad news. The bad news is there's no such thing as work-life balance. It's something people chase for their entire lives. Certainly accomplished people, certainly people who achieve in their lives. It doesn't exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is just the very terminology itself. We don't talk about food-life balance, sleep-life balance. And we don't because we understand quite clearly that eating is part of life and sleeping is part of life. So to talk about life balance, you're bifurcating work and life. And that's already a recipe to disaster. Work is part of life. And whether one looks at it from a Torah perspective or one looks at it from a general perspective, that's what life is. Life is, what do you do when you live? You build a family and you make a difference through the work and you earn a living and you serve customers. That's what life is. Life is not sitting in a restaurant. Life is not watching movies, reading books. That's not life. That's escape from life. Life is working and serving other people, whether it's in one's family or outside. So to talk about balance already is a problem, and one should much rather talk about work-life integration. There's one Shulchan Aruch. Choshen Mishpat is part of the same Shulchan Aruch as Yerodei and Orach Chaim is. It's one Shulchan Aruch. The Rambam's Mishnah Torah is one Mishnah Torah with every part of it. That importance, and that at the end of it is the real contribution of Avram Avinu to the world, is understanding the oneness of, not just the oneness of Hashem, The oneness of Hashem leads to the idea of oneness of everything. The idea of integration, the idea that everything is one, and that there's avodas Hashem all the time in whatever you're doing. And Shavisi Hashem lenegdi tomid means tomid. Hashem is before me always, no matter what I'm doing. So it's not about balancing two things; it's about how you integrate them, how they work together. And the way to do that is firstly, I think, to make integration a life goal. So instead of making work-life balance a goal, or family a goal, or making integration a goal, and understanding that's the key to get that integrated. To understand that work is one of the instruments with which you fulfill your purpose in the world. As we've talked about before, it's not just a means of earning a parnasa, and that if you won the lottery, you would stop working. You very possibly wouldn't, because there is value in the working world. Even if one has the opportunity to also be in the world of Torah and would like to be there more. You get integration by being kover itim for learning and family, not fitting it into spare moments, but being kover itim and understanding it's not so much about how much time, it's more about the attention, to make sure that when you're with your family, you're fully with your family. It's a very surprising thing that I've taught many parents and husbands and wives in relationships, and they've always thanked me for it afterwards, but have been shocked when I've taught it to them. And that is, people don't need much of your time. They need a lot of your attention. And people get satisfied with attention, and giving somebody a lot of time without attention is very unsatisfying. Giving people a lot of attention in small time bites can be very satisfying. And that means you turn your phone off. If you're talking to your wife, or you're talking to your children, or you're talking to a friend, or you're learning, you turn your phone off. You don't even have it on silent. You actually turn the thing off. It's just out of the equation. It's out of the room. And so with any other technology. And that you really are present. You're fully present. You can achieve so much more in so much less time. When I was doing Shimush with Moshe Feinstein, I had the opportunity to ask Rebbetzin Shifra Tendler, his daughter, what it was like growing up with a father who belonged to the community, to whom you had less access than the community had. Was there resentment? What did it feel like? And she said, we were just so proud of what our father did that it didn't matter. And the time he did spend with us was so valuable and so beautiful and so intense. We felt completely satisfied. And it's really important. The partner in my business is somebody, and I said to you that I've always made a point of having an assistant, even in the first days of my first jobs, of my first businesses where I didn't have the money. I had to take it out of my own pocket to pay for an assistant, because I realized if time was truly important for me, I've got to pay somebody to do things that I don't need to be doing. And another important thing is partnerships, to try and find a partner that is strong in the areas you're not strong, so that they can do that area. And I was very fortunate in a partner who's been with me for well over 30 years already. And her children were putting her under a lot of pressure at a certain point, and that they weren't seeing enough of her. And she was suffering with being torn by the business and home, work-life balance issues. And what she did was she took her children and she gave them a workshop. She explained to them what she does. She explained her work. She explained the difference she makes in people's lives. She showed them some of the responses, some of the letters that her clients had sent her. And it just changed everything. The children just said, wow, Mom, if that's what you're doing, then that's great. That's cool. That's fantastic. And they then asked her to come to their school and tell the school what she does. And now their friends at school all saying, wow, that's so cool what your mom does. So that just immediately removed the pressure of the work-life balance. It's not just about how much time and being torn here and there. It's your family needs to understand the value of what you're doing. And the family needs to feel when you're with them, you're 100% with them. No matter how short those times may be, when you're with them, you're 100% with them. Your wife needs to feel that, and your children need to feel that.
And what role does success play in this dynamic? Because I could see myself in a crossroads where, you might think that a certain position will require travel or longer hours, and that seems to put the family and the career at odds with one another. So how does that play out, or how should that play out?
So important question, and very important to bring the family along with those decisions and those choices. And you're right when you're talking about success and growth and moving into another situations. We talked about outgrowing a job or a particular position in a company and needing to move on, because that changes who you are. It also changes your effectiveness as a man. This is more important for men than women generally. Women's sense of self doesn't come from their work. They can be incredibly good at their work. It's not often that they really feel defined by their work fully. They're defined by more than their work. Men are much more defined by the difference they make, the work they do, the recognition they get for the work that they do. Men have bigger egos, and those egos need to be nourished. So for a man to a nebuch, and I know that's not what you're referring to, but just to amplify it and just say, I'm a nebuch, but it's okay because I only work a few hours a day and I can sit and learn the rest of the day. You're not really serving anybody, because at the end, very often, family loses respect. The marital relationship suffers as a result of that. A man needs to be a gavra. A man needs to be a gavra. There's the word of gibor in it. And either in Torah you're a gavra, in Torah you're just super successful and just achieving wonders in the world of Torah, or in the world of chesed, or in the world of work and business or professions. But it's important not to be a nobody. And sometimes that does mean it takes more effort, and it's important to bring the family along so that they understand that growth is actually in their interests too, both financially and socially, and in terms of who you are as a growing human being.
And one of the things that we were talking about a little bit before offline was the dynamic of two spouses working, which obviously could be that different generations have different approaches, different countries, different economic situations. And you had some things to say that, I don't know, maybe someone would think them controversial. Maybe you can share some of those thoughts here, and I have some follow-up questions.
So ideally, the way the Moshe designed the world is clearly that the man goes out and is kovesh the world, and the woman, not that she doesn't work. We see in Shulchan Aruch that the shiyamum, that being bored is terrible. It causes terrible suffering for a woman. But the type of work, the type of pressure, that she doesn't have to go out and conquer. There's a difference between work that needs conquest, that needs winning, and work that needs just to be done, and that is supportive work that needs to be done. So not only is there nothing wrong with a woman working, but we see in Shulchan Aruch that a woman should be working, but not in an environment, if possible. And the circumstances today make a lot of things very difficult. If possible, to be in a more nurturing, creative environment, or nurturing or creative environment, supportive environment, preferably, rather than in one where you need to go out aggressively and conquer new markets and conquer new clients and kill the competition and all these warlike business terms. That's just not anything that does a whole lot for a woman. So if one can, even where it is both have to work, if one can try and still achieve the balance where the man is the kovesh and the woman is the ezer kenegdo, if one can still keep that dynamic, it becomes really important. And I think a lot of work-life balance is being an effective husband and an effective father, not just a time issue.
Practically, give me some tips on how to do that, how to be a gavra, how to be the husband who garners the respect of the children and the wife and people around me.
So there, I think that balance and that dynamic between husband and wife and between parent and child becomes really important. And I always feel a little humble when I'm asked to talk in this area, because I've been through a divorce and a remarriage, and at one time I thought that disqualified me to talk about this at all. And over the years I've thought, no, it actually gives me an angle of experience which I didn't have before. When one's actually failed at something, the learning is huge. And I think that the husband piece, it's so interesting, because if you start with the first mission in Kiddushin, you get the blueprint that kinyan is not just a transaction. Kinyan is an ongoing relationship between husband and wife, and it has 3 dimensions. It has kesef, it's the way you treat her physically with money, literally, how generous you are. It's about shtar, which is communication, and it's about bia, which is the physical relationship. And if you look at how the Rambam actually deals with it in the 15th parak of Hilchos Ishus, at the end of the parak, the Rambam actually goes through a beautiful sequence. But just looking at a few of the comments there, the one thing is the Rambam says V'chova al kol ish lekanot leishto. A man has to, he says chova, it is an obligation for a man to be passionate about his wife. Lekanot doesn't just mean jealous, it's the jealousy that comes out of passion. And you see that from the way the Rambam continues there, that we're talking about passion. So a man has to be passionate. And it's interesting that that's a chova. He actually has to invest in it. He has to take care. He's got to work on his passion. And so does she. The relationship has to be work on that. And that's the physical relationship. That's that area of bia. And then he says, and that passionate relationship has to be one that is not a violent one, God forbid, but one that is mitoch sicha v'simcha. And there you've got the communication piece, to be able to communicate in a way that is playful and joyful is an important part. And a man needs to learn how to do that and practice how to do that. And then he comes into be mechabed. And im yeshlo mammon marbe betovata k'fi mammon. If you've got money, spend money on her, invest physically in her. And those are the three kinyonim you see the Rambam bringing up there, and then he ends off with these beautiful comments of Drachim elu yeshuvan na'er meshubach. That way you're guaranteed to have beautiful relationships. So from husbanding, that becomes really, really important to make sure that the passion is in place, that the conversation and communication is in place, playfulness and joyfulness of communication, and the generosity. That there's really an important generosity. And when my daughters used to go dating, I used to say to them, if a man doesn't pay for the meal, for the date, that's the last time you see him. Not because you can't afford it, it just says something about what that relationship's going to be. That he doesn't express his governance by wanting to invest and take care of the finance. And I know today, it's not always the politically correct thing to do, but we see in the Mishnah and in the Rambam that's really important. And on the parenting side, it's balancing that governance of the man, the gvura of the man, with the chesed of the woman, because it's the chesed and the gvura that you want the child to feel from two people who are on the same page. So that the gvura that comes from you don't want the man to play mother. You want the man to be a father. Where there's discipline, where possible, the father should do that. It doesn't damage the paternal relationship, but it can damage the maternal relationship. When a father it disciplines, if it comes from a place of ahava, it comes from a place of deep love, the child responds well to it. And particularly when the discipline is reinforced by the chesed of the mother. The child doesn't play the one parent off against the other, but realize it's the same messaging, one coming through the one vehicle and the other coming from the other. And just the living love and showing love to them, to one another, to the couple, to your limud Torah, to your avodas Hashem, just letting them see love in everything that you do, and inspiring the children with curiosity, because that's the one thing they won't necessarily learn at school and even in yeshiva sometimes. Just really inspiring them with curiosity so that they will want to learn. And teaching midas, those are, if one does that, then I think one's doing really, really well.
I really appreciate that. And you mentioned the fact that you've learned some of these lessons the hard way through failure, and I appreciate that. And it leads to maybe another topic, which is the fact that I personally feel like I'd rather overthink things ahead of time and really try to avoid putting myself in a situation where I might end up failing. Although failing can be a very valuable learning tool. And we discussed this a little bit in the past, sort of trying to set up a frictionless society, a frictionless generation. So what do you think is the right way to approach that and to find the balance? Obviously, I don't think you or anyone else would recommend going into marriage where you thought it might fail. But there is something to be said for putting yourself at risk of failure. And that can be helpful and a growth path in many different ways. So what's your perspective on that?
So the vulnerability is incredibly important for growth and for trust building. And vulnerability means a willingness to take a risk. And that means a risk of rejection or a risk of failure. There's so many opportunities in life that we miss because we're afraid to take the risk. And very often it's just risk of rejection. And usually it's just a fear. It doesn't actually act out, but we hold ourselves back because of that. So it becomes really important to engage with life and to take risks with life, to take measured risks, obviously not reckless risks with life, but one wants to take the risks. It is through the risks that there's growth. I was really impressed by the way and taken with the fact that in our last session, when the podcast went live, you included the piece where you said, I don't know if I'm actually going to put this live, remember? And you did. And that was being vulnerable and allowing your listeners to learn from what you're experiencing, because that's the way we learn. If we come across invulnerably, there's nothing to learn. Others can't really learn from us because they don't see us struggle. The struggle is what life is. It's just so important. As the example that I've just often given about when you're lifting weights in the gym. The reason you're building muscle is because you're resisting the gravitational pull on your weights. And the stronger the gravitational pull, the more you resist that, the greater your growth is. If you swim with the current, you'll go faster, but you won't develop any muscle strength. If you swim against the current, you're growing, you're developing strength, even if you don't go as far. And in our society, we just want to get there quickly. We want to get to the outcome. We want to get to the result. The process of growth is something that we don't value as a society enough. And the process of growth is hard. The process of growth is sometimes disappointing. And we do deal with failure. Failure is part of life, and really important to raise children to be able to manage failure rather than to avoid it at all costs.
And how do we bring that approach to work? You mentioned before that you have a team, they're all over the world, and the only thing you can really measure is the output, is the result, and not the process. So how do we manage that?
So in work, the process then becomes the thinking process, the innovation process, the building relationships process. It's the process of the things that technology can't do. So when I'm talking about delegating process, I'm talking about the process that technology can do. That the technology can make my lists, the technology can dial the phone numbers, that can do all sorts of amazing things. But to have the conversation, that has to come from an individual. And again, I can script my conversation word for word, and then I've got little risk of messing up, but I'm sound robotic. Or I can just go with it and connect with the other person on the other side of the phone and be a real human being and run the risk of rejection or failing in some way or another. So just being open to that, because that's life. That's the joy of life. That's the fun of life. That's the playfulness of life.
Wow, that is a great way to end this series. Rav Lapin, you've been very, very helpful and given so many great insights that I've enjoyed, and our listeners already, the feedback is coming in, and they've all been enjoying it greatly. So thank you so much for taking all the time and for everything that you shared in this great series.
Thank you, Yaakov. It's been a pleasure to be speaking to you.